All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first meeting of the Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources Committee, Chesapeake Subcommittee. Clerk, if you can open the roll for attendance. All right, clerk, close the roll. We have a quorum. All right, thank you everybody for being here. We do have quite a number of bills on our agenda today. We'll try to move through as quickly as possible while also making sure that we fairly vet each one of these. I know that there are a number of people who have additional subcommittees they need to be doing in the afternoon. We're going to try to get those folks in as soon as possible or first. If you wind up, if you haven't let me know that you have a conflict, please just come over and make sure that I know that, and we'll go ahead and get you through as soon as possible. So the first two that we're going to have up, actually we're going to start off with Delegate Askew, and then Delegate Campbell, you'll be second. But Delegate Askew, you have House Bill 1697. Welcome. Describe your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. Today I have before us HB 1697, which is an exciting bill. This bill will eliminate outdated seasonal restrictions on shrimp and horseshoe crab trawling within 3 miles of Virginia's Atlantic shoreline, giving them MRC greater flexibility to manage these fisheries through updated science-based regulations. Both fisheries have regulatory oversight necessary to ensure balanced resource management, and these changes will align with Virginia and other states' practices, such as North Carolina and other states along the coast. While promoting sustainable growth in ocean-based fisheries, this bill preserves existing trawling prohibitions within the Chesapeake Bay, balancing industry needs with conservation goals in mind. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you very much, Delegate Askew. Does any member of the subcommittee have questions for the delegate? Yes, Delegate Weber.
All right. So the legislation, VMRC still has oversight. It's just expanding the distance up to 3 miles for shrimp and crabs, not fish.
Mr. Chair, I would say to the delegate, sort of both, and it is currently being practiced, but sort of unregulated, sort of putting some regulations on some of the practices and making sure it's sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. And I did have one maybe question, but to ensure that I'm reading this properly, and perhaps this is VMRC. So the language talks about permits or licenses to take or catch fish, shellfish, or marine organisms with a trawl within 3 miles for the shrimp and horseshoe crab fisheries. And I think that's all just limited to horseshoe crab and shrimp fisheries, and was just wondering why the whole other language about fish and shellfish and marine organisms and whether that was necessary.
Okay, Jamie, speak to this.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, Jamie Green, Commissioner of VMRC. This is specific for the shrimp and horseshoe crab fishery. It's just cleaning the language up a little bit inside of where we already regulate the fishery. It's not adding the other fisheries or anything like that into it. Okay. So you're correct in your assumption.
All right. Okay. Not seeing any further questions from the subcommittee. Does any member of the audience wish to speak in favor of the legislation? Do we have anybody in the audience who wishes to speak in opposition to the legislation? Seeing none, we'll bring the discussion back to the committee.
Move to report.
Second. It's been properly moved and reported, or seconded to report. Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk, open the roll. All right, clerk, close the roll. That bill reports 9-0. Thank you very much, Delegate Askew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee.
All right, next up we have Delegate Campbell. Delegate Campbell, welcome. Your House Bill 1813.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 1813 is a bill that was brought to me by a constituent, along with some other folks in my area that have some concerns that we're losing access to our trout waters in the Commonwealth. This bill would direct the Board of Wildlife Resources to establish and manage a trout fishing access site registry where the landowner can register their land, and it would allow licensed fishermen access to the land. In return, the landowner would be able to be eligible for a tax credit. Years ago, people had handshakes and agreements, gentlemen agreements on these types of things, but as properties have changed, ownership, a lot of these things are not working the way they used to. So it is our intention to incentivize the landowner to make this friendly for the fishermen so that we can preserve what I think is an important way of life in our area. I would be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Delegate Campbell. Does any member of the subcommittee have any questions? I guess, Delegate, my question, I guess maybe there's two of them. Do you have an idea of what the overall fiscal impact of this might be?
So we have this capped at $1 million per year. It's hard to tell definitively how much that would be because we don't have a really true handle on how many pieces of property that this impacts. But we have it so that it would be a first come, first served basis to apply for the tax credits.
Okay. And then I guess my second question is what would the parameters be with respect to access, or would that be left up to the state agency to determine that? And so I guess I'm thinking in terms of the amount of time, whether it's all year round, whether it's just a portion of a stream, whether it's an entire stream.
I would say, Mr. Chairman, that would be something that the board would have to come up with those parameters to see what that would look like.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Delegate Campbell. All right. Seeing no other questions, does any member of the audience wish to speak in favor of the legislation? All right. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to speak in opposition to the legislation? All right, moving back to.
There's a virtual speaker here.
Oh, we got a virtual speaker. Let's see, is that
He said Donovan.
Mr. Donovan? Mr. Donovan, welcome virtually. All right. Mr. Donovan, if you are on and can turn mute off, we'd be very glad to have your presentation.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, and we do ask you to use your camera.
Yes, sorry. There we are. Can you see me okay?
We can. Floor is yours.
Okay. Yes, so over, decades, really, these handshake agreements that Ellen Campbell just spoke of, because the landowners are doing it for free, as soon as, a landowner dies and it's left, to their children, for instance, and there's no economic incentive to keep it going, we've really lost a lot of trout water over the past couple of decades, and it's only getting more intense over the past couple of years. And so really what this tax credit, this $2,000 tax credit would do is it would keep these agreements, there would be more incentive to keep them going, but also a really interesting thing is when there's public access to a water, environmental organizations will come in and they will start doing projects to improve stream health and habitat for the fish. And so this would be not just a fishing bill, but also, there would be opportunity for organizations to come in and improve habitat. Does that make sense?
No, thank you very much. Is that all your testimony?
I think that's, that's about it, yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. Okay. Yes, Delegate Krizik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions for the patron. It's interesting that there's nobody out there that is willing to testify except for the one we did have. But I've not run into this before. Do we have these kinds of tax credits for other kinds of fishing or hunting or different kinds of fish, for example? Is there anything else like this, or is this a unique one-off idea? And if it is, Mr. Chairman, kind of question two, but a follow-up, and you can answer all these together. Is it how did you come up with a $2,000, and is that how much trout one would expect to, the value of the trout for a year, that kind of thing? So I'm a little bit, I just want to know the genesis of it, make sure it's been really well thought out, because it almost feels like it needs to go to Finance Committee, and certainly probably going to have to go to appropriations if we report it, because it's $1 million hit. But if you could just kind of elaborate a little bit more, Delegate. Thank you.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, I think the first question, I got stuck on the second one. So you're wondering, could you repeat that to me, please?
Mr. Chairman, is that okay if I just repeat this? Yep. So what I'm trying to figure out the kind of thought process, how you arrived at $2,000, and is it a unique thing? Is this something that's done with other types of hunting or fishing?
Mr. Chairman, so the answer to that, to my knowledge, this would be something that is unique to the trout fishing. And we worked on the $2,000 credit because we did feel like that would be a reasonable amount for a landowner to be able to get some benefit for it. But it also would be something that, again, we don't know how heavily this will be used, so that if we have the $1 million cap, that a lot of people could participate.
All right. Further questions? I did have a question for the department, because this would require administration of the program. I wanted to get a sense of how much it would cost to be able to put together and maintain and track the registry and enforce to make sure the property owners were indeed abiding by their obligations.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Ryan Brown, Director of the Department of Wildlife Resources, and there are two agencies, I guess, that are involved in this one. I don't know if anybody from the tax department is here. We would envision the impact to DWR of setting up and administering this program to be pretty minimal as far as new programs go. I think our fiscal folks think about $50,000 total. That's establishing the regulations and other criteria around the program, and then maintaining the inventory over time.
Thank you. Delegate Bloxham, then Delegate Laufer.
Question for the director, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, if I owned a trout stream, can I lease it like I do my farmland for hunting rights? Or is there a prohibition against that?
In general, and not to prolong the meeting by getting in the Crown Grant discussion, some waters in the western part of the state have different ownership. But if we're talking about truly private bottom land, you would not be leasing the stream itself. You would be leasing access, the land that you own. You can certainly lease access rights to.
All right, thank you. Delegate Laufer.
I just want to say that this is compelling, I think, but do you know any other states that offer such agreements, or just more information about how many people, et cetera?
Mr. Chairman, I would say to the delegate that I am not aware of any other state providing this at this time.
All right. Seeing no more questions, Delegate Clark. Delegate Clark.
Just a motion to gently lay this bill on the table.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Clerk, open the roll. All right, clerk close the roll. That bill is tabled gently on a 7-3
Thank
vote.
you.
All right, Delegate Simons. Delegate Simons, I believe you have House Bill 2034.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have an amendment, a line amendment to this bill.
Okay, can our attorney read the line amendment?
Introduce after institutions, we're going to insert the Virginia Farm Bureau, comma, the, and on line 30, introduce after entities, we're inserting a comma.
Okay, do you want to explain
Yeah.
explain the amendment and we'll vote on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just wanted to make sure we added the Virginia Farm Bureau to our academic institutions.
Very good. Okay, anybody have any questions about the amendment? If not, can I get a motion?
Move the amendment.
Second.
All right, it's properly moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, the bill as amended is before us. Delegate Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Virginia is home to about 1 million acres of wetlands, but these wetlands are rapidly disappearing. The worst part about this is we don't really know how much we're losing, where it's disappearing, or how fast. What this bill does is create a policy task force to draw upon the best practices developed by nonprofit organizations, academic institutions, industry leaders, and state entities to protect our wetlands and implement plans to address the impacts from human activities and sea level rise. We need our wetlands to protect our coastlines from erosion and the impacts of more frequent storms, to serve as important sites for recreation and tourism, and to provide habitat for Virginia's wildlife like fish, shellfish, which are vital to our seafood industry and local economies.
All right. Members of the subcommittee have any questions for Delegate Simons? Okay. Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, you mentioned, the human element and sea level rise. Would you also take into consideration land subsidence and this? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Wilt.
Yes, I agree. It's important. Land subsidence is definitely happening at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Other members have questions, comments? If not, does anybody in the audience wish to speak in favor of the budget or the amendment? Not the amendment, the bill, sorry. And appropriations for too long.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jay Ford with Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We're very grateful to the delegate for bringing this piece of legislation. We have worked with a lot of stakeholders over the summer to kind of refine this language, and this group is really set up as a natural complement to some of the work that the administration has done with Executive Order 10. And they have created a technical team that is looking at wetlands and the state's implementation. But as Delegate Simons highlighted, we're going in the wrong direction on wetlands despite having a no net loss policy. Our own Coastal Resilience Master Plan has us on course to lose over 80% of our tidal wetlands by the end of this century and over 50% of our non-tidal wetlands. What this task force would do is help do really a comprehensive analysis of our policies, procedures, and programs and figure out what improvements can be made, and also look at some comprehensive planning for them to persist into the future. So this is really a complement to some of the good work that is coming, that the Youngkin administration is working on, and we hope you will all look favorably upon it.
Very good. Delegate Weber?
Yeah, question for Jay. All right, so what are we losing our wetlands to if we have a net zero policy?
Yeah, I think that is part of the task at hand here. For we can point to a number of factors. Of course, both subsidence and sea level rise are probably the biggest if we were going to make a pie graph. But there are other things out there. No mitigation is perfect. It's a lot of times it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's much like any large land use in the state. You never get anything perfect, but climate change drivers are making this making it much, much more difficult, and that's what's driving the loss at this rapid pace.
Further question, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Weber.
So do you foresee this task force as being the, I guess, the meeting place for a lot of these ideas in order to stop losing our?
Yeah, I think that's precisely what it would be is, we've got practitioners via the administration's task force looking at best practices for project implementation, and this group would really be looking at the policy side of that and saying, what could we do better in the policy program and procedure space to make sure that we're hitting our goals?
One last question, Mr.
Delegate Weber.
Sorry. So when it comes to, like, I guess, wetlands mitigation and things like that, would they be looking at some of the current practices and seeing if there are practices that are better suited when we start mitigating wetlands in the case of, development in other places?
Well, wetlands mitigation policy is federally directed. Virginia has ability to make some decisions here in the state, and actually I'd really be hesitant to talk about it because we are in the middle of a public comment period on our wetlands mitigation banks right now. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Weber. Okay. Any further members of the audience wishing to speak in favor of the bill? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Carter Lovejoy with the Virginia Sierra Club. And for the reasons that Jay just said, we very much support this bill.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the committee, Ian Blair, Wetlands Watch. As you could imagine, we care greatly about wetlands. And for the points specifically with the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan and that shocking fact that 89% of wetlands may be lost by 2080, we hope that by supporting House Bill 2034 and getting these state agencies together, we can move from just studying impacts and work together to develop tangible solutions and a unified direction for action to safeguard these essential ecosystems.
Right,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, Pat Calvert, I'm speaking on behalf of Virginia Conservation Network and Virginia League of Conservation Voters today in support of this bill. Thank you for bringing it.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, Jake Tabor, Virginia Farm Bureau. Appreciate the delegate including us in the task force, and we support this and the conversation going forward.
All right, great. Is there any member of the audience who wishes to speak in opposition to the bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll tell you, I think to Delegate Webert's point, there's actually a lot going on in the area of wetlands, and so we've got our Chesapeake Bay Agreement goals that I think we're struggling to meet. We also have a number of changes at the federal level in terms of the definitions of waters of the U.S. So number of other, and then you got the sea level rise and land subsidence. And so I think this is just an opportunity to be able to get our arms around and have all be rowing in the same direction on wetlands policy. But Delegate Simons, did you want to say the last word before I entertain a motion?
Just, Mr. Chair, just to follow up with what you just said, I think we want to make sure that we have coordination between different state agencies and researchers and the Farm Bureau, all the different interested parties in this issue.
Very good. All right, members of the subcommittee, we operate by motion.
Move to report. Second.
As amended. As amended. All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Clerk, open the roll. All right, clerk, close the roll. That bill reports with amendments 10-0. Thank you so much. All right, Delegate Kent. Tell us about House Bill 1908.
Thank you, Chair. House B 1908 is a study that we are working with for VIMS. The importance of this study is to understand the impacts of cumulative surface water intakes. I might need a water.
Particles.
Oh, man.
Particulate.
Delegate Kent, did you? My apologies.
You want us to You want a chance to,
For some reason, I just got a tickle in my throat. I've been good all day.
Mr. Chairman?
yes, sir.
We'd like to make a motion for the amendment.
Take just a small break and hear someone else.
Yeah, would you like?
Sure, I'm good. I would say during this time, could I ask the committee to move the amendment that we have regarding particles?
I think we're good. Yeah, that would be great if Anissa, if you could go ahead and report an amendment and do it slow. Read it really slow.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, on line 14, introduced after by, we're inserting using the existing fine resolution three-dimensional hydrodynamic particle model or equivalent alternative as determined by VIMS. And that's separated by 2 Romanettes.
Very good. And just for the subcommittee's edification, so that you can understand that in context, if you look at the bill right now, it focuses on quantifying the salinity migration. It doesn't actually speak to the other point of the bill, which is the larva of different flora and fauna. And so that's what that does, is ensure that we got both of those items covered. And that was the delegate's intent.
Thank you.
Okay. Any members have any questions on the amendment?
Move the amendment.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the bill as amended is before us. Delegate Kent.
Thank you. My apologies. So, including the amendment, the goal of this bill would be to study and be proactive in understanding what is now becoming a practice to have surface water intakes, to understand what that effect is long-term on aquafauna in the Chesapeake Bay, and identifying potential issues now before it gets too far. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does any member of the subcommittee have questions of the delegate?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Weber.
Okay, so if the goal is to study the cumulative impacts of surface water intakes, how many intakes are there in the Chesapeake Bay that are fairly big, I would say?
So it would be the tributaries of, so it would be a 3-year study. It would be multiple impacts of intake. So we're looking at the whole entire picture of what the cumulative intakes would be on the tributaries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Seeing none, is there any member of the audience who wishes to speak in favor of the legislation? All right, come on up.
Mr. Chair, Steve Carter Lovejoy with the Virginia Sierra Club, and we support this bill.
Thank you.
Jake Tabor, Virginia Farm Bureau. We're in support of the bill and appreciate the delegate bringing it forward. Saltwater intrusion posed a lot of significant issues for agriculture and crop production, and we think this is something that is good, and we're very supportive. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Brent Hunsinger. I'm with Friends of the Rappahannock. I'd like to thank the delegate for working with us to bring this bill. It is my understanding, Delegate Weber, that there are hundreds in each watershed of intakes, permitted, unpermitted, industrial, commercial, agricultural, across the board. Part of this study would make an attempt, that's why it's 3 years, to collect all of that data into one spot that they can then put into the particle tracking model and run that. That's why it's a 3-year study. There's a lot of background work to do before they can actually just run the modeling, and that's why it's that. As you may be aware, water supply planning and availability are timely issues. The needs for surface water are increasing as localities, especially in Eastern Virginia groundwater management area, are being encouraged to go from reliance on groundwater wells to surface water supplies. So they're looking to them as an alternative. As pressure mounts on our surface water supplies, the current state of our fisheries is declining. Think American shad, striped bass, and then the farmers, as already mentioned, are having to withdraw their irrigation for their crops more frequently and earlier in the season. So what we lack is a clear picture as to what the cumulative effects are from all surface water intakes on aquatic fauna and water quality, specifically, as mentioned, upriver salinity migration, beyond what's happening to sea level rise. VIMS has indicated that they have the ability to do the study, and they view this as a comprehensive risk assessment and a wise effort going forward to be proactive. So thank you very much, and we hope you will support this bill.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Chris Moore with Chesapeake Bay Foundation. First of all, we want to thank Delegate Kent for bringing this as well. As Mr. Hunsinger said, there are a number of living resource concerns that have emerged as we've tried to get away from using Potomac Aquifer and gone more to surface water. We haven't studied the cumulative impact of all those different kind of straws that we're sticking into our rivers. And so this will help us get a much better handle on those impacts, and we hope that you all will look favorably upon the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Jeff Palmore on behalf of the VIMS Foundation. As the previous speaker mentioned, VIMS does have the ability to do it. We don't have the resources to do it, so we would just hope that the bill catches up with the budget amendment during the process. So thank you.
All right, very good.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Subcommittee. Leslie Ann Hammond, York River Steward, and I support previously stated comments. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Pat Calvert on behalf of League of Conservation Voters of Virginia. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. And Virginia Conservation Network and anybody else who wants to support this. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Is there any member of the audience who wishes to speak in opposition to the measure? If not, back to subcommittee, I'd remind us if we have a motion that this also needs to be referred to appropriations. Do we have a motion?
I'm second.
All right, it's been properly motioned to report and refer as amended. Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk open the roll. All right, clerk close the roll. That bill reports 9-0.
Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me.
Absolutely. Okay, next up, I believe we have Mr. Delegate O'Quinn. Welcome. And you have with you House Bill 2212.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2212 is a bill that is actually pretty simple in what it's designed to do, which is to remove non-Chesapeake Bay watershed localities from the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Act. So geographically, the Chesapeake Bay watershed begins in Botetourt County around roughly mile marker 159 on Interstate 81, and everything west goes into a different watershed. Where we are specifically goes into the Tennessee River watershed. And so I fully understand and appreciate and support why we need the regulations we have for our contributions to the Chesapeake Bay. Certainly an incredibly diverse and unique body of water. I'll tell you what isn't a unique and diverse body of water is the Mississippi River. And so besides the obvious geographic reason, there are two other reasons for this change. So these requirements, regulatory requirements, drastically increase the cost of development for really anything you go to do, residential, commercial, public properties. We have all kinds of horror stories of schools that have had to shelve projects over that. And of course, housing is a huge need, as we all know, in the Commonwealth. And there's a development right now, which is about a half mile inside the Virginia line. That's right on the razor's edge, and it's most likely going to end up with 300 single-family housing units built in Bristol, Tennessee, instead, due to the high cost of development in Virginia. Certainly, school construction funding. I look across the podium and see a lot of people that were in that fight with us for school construction dollars, and now we have projects that are too expensive to complete. We have a story of a tennis court at Abingdon High School in Washington County that ended up being $75,000 over budget due to the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Act. And the second thing that I would point out, Mr. Chairman, is that state regulations in the Tennessee River watershed are exceedingly less stringent than ours. And so in many cases, we're sending pretty pristine water into an area where it's going to have absolutely zero impact. So we had regulations in place prior to 2014 when the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Act went into place. This would keep those in place. Doesn't affect those in the least. Certainly illegal discharges and all these other things that are not permitted would not be permitted or tolerated, and those guardrails would remain in place, but we would simply remove the extraordinarily stringent requirements of the Act from the areas that are not geographically in it. And so I've also heard, we need a uniform standard. There are all sorts of things that we regulate differently in Virginia. These watersheds go in completely opposite directions. There's no reason they couldn't have more than one regulatory requirement. And so, Mr. Chairman, I would say that when it comes to trying to help with the housing crisis, or when it comes to residential development, or a new manufacturer that might want to locate in the area, or building a new school, this is one of the most baffling issues that people face in our region, and one of the things that I hear most consistently that the state needs to do something about. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what the bill does.
All right. Thank you very much, Delegate. Does members of the subcommittee have any questions? I did. Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked the delegate, and I think I heard you say that prior to 2014, this region of the Commonwealth was not under the Chesapeake Bay regulatory regimen. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think the bill says, and hopefully we're looking at the same version, lines 14 and 15, shall apply the regulations were in effect prior to July 1 of 2014.
And I guess the follow if I could.
Delegate Ware.
So at that point, the regulatory oversight was of a type that was pertinent to that region and that watershed.
Mr. Chairman, not being intimately familiar with exactly how the structure of everything was in 2014, I would say the answer to that question is yes, that it was something that was more appropriate for the region, not contributing to a lot of the issues with sulfur and other things that had been found in the bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Ware. And maybe Director Rolband might want to be on deck, just because I have so much fun calling up Delegate or Director Rolband. I guess, so I believe at the time we were dealing with two requirements. So we had the stormwater management regulations, and then we also had the erosion and sediment control regulations. I believe that what we're talking about is the Consolidated Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Act, which didn't change the criteria dramatically, but it was meant to integrate the two programs so that they're actually streamlined from the development process, so you don't have two total acts that you had to go ahead and deal with, but also dealt with, I think, some discrepancies and disparities and some conflicts that were between the two. And so to me, I think it's a good thing when you're taking two different things and putting them together and streamlining them, but I just wanted to see if I had my understanding correct or not.
Mr. Chairman, as far as what each of those two separate acts would contain, I think that is a DEQ question. And certainly, we don't want to make things more difficult than they were before. But I do think that the combining of the two has raised the requirements of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Act to, I would imagine, probably one of the most stringent in the nation. I don't know if there's a way that you necessarily rank those, but exceedingly stringent for a reason, but then the rest of the state kind of got roped into that.
Okay. Good. And I guess, again, from my perspective, I don't believe that you all are subject to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. I think it's the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulations, which are aimed primarily at protecting your local streams and rivers rather than any larger water body. Seeing no other questions of the committee, is there anybody in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of the bill? Is there anybody? Oh, and we do got one online, two online. All right, so we got 1 for, 1 against. Let's go with Dr. Paragon first.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Keith Perigin, School Superintendent here in Washington County, Virginia. and I also serve as the president of the Coalition of Small and Rural Schools of Virginia. Delegate O'Quinn mentioned a tennis court project that is in process here in Washington County. You actually over my shoulder can see that, maybe not because of the glare on the window, but as he mentioned earlier, that project cost an additional $75,000 to complete because of these regulations, and it has also caused that project to be about 3 months longer than what it would be without those regulations. You can see the work that's being done over my shoulder is about 300 yards behind me, and that is all for the retention pond that must be built because of those regulations, whereas the tennis courts, actually, the fence of the tennis courts would be right outside of my window. And so there are other stories just like that in Smith County and Grayson County, Carroll County, and Wythe County that involve the cost of the projects being larger and also the timeliness of the projects taking longer. One particular example for this project of our tennis courts is probably the difference between our athletes being able to use tennis courts this season or having to wait till next season for those to be used. Thank you very much for hearing our concerns and appreciate your support of the bill.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Peregrine, for joining us. Are there other members of the audience who wish to speak in favor? Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to speak in opposition to the bill? And for folks who are going to be jumping up and down a lot, if you want to sit closer in, that would be super. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Steve Carter Lovejoy with the Virginia Sierra Club, and we oppose this. We think that the regulations are good for water quality, and we think that the waters of the Western Virginia deserve the same water quality that we give them here. There are plenty of aquatic resources that need a high level of water quality. It doesn't really matter what's downstream from Virginia. What matters is what our resources are trying to take advantage of here in Virginia. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Ian Blair, Wetlands Watch. While we do care about wetlands, we also care about safe floodplain management. We urge you to oppose HB 2212 from a statewide floodplain management perspective. An unintended consequence of rolling back such standards would result in let me back up. Here we go. As the facilitating organization of the statewide working group for the National Flood Insurance Program, the community rating system, if you do higher standards for floodplain management, you get points that then result in discounts to flood insurance premiums. Local governments across Virginia have adopted stormwater management standards more productive than those required, and by doing this, they get these discounts. If this bill passes, those higher standards will be rolled back, and those points will be retracted, resulting in higher flood insurance costs for homeowners. This, added with increasing rainfall intensity and duration, using MRISA data, an average of 18% of Virginia's rainfall has increased since 2006, making effective stormwater management more critical than ever. These changes are already putting communities at risk. Reverting outdated stormwater standards ignores these realities, leaving neighborhoods more vulnerable to flooding and erosion and less prepared for future climate conditions. I think that HB 2212 would set parts of Virginia back, undermining financial security as well as climate resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Emily Francis with the Southern Environmental Law Center. We know that the quantity of stormwater that runs off a parcel of land matters. That fast-moving water often makes it to a stream, and depending on the volume and depending on the speed, it can have damaging effects, so locally in the community. So scouring stream banks, smothering aquatic habitat, and increasing flood risk. And so the 2014 regulations were intended to get at these problems. And so we support maintaining those standards statewide. We hope that you'll vote no on the bill today. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Pat Calvert, Virginia Conservation Network, and also representing League of Conservation Voters of Virginia today. I've got a statement from Sharon Fisher, who's president of the Clinch Coalition, whose rivers would be affected by this bill. The Clinch Coalition is an environmental nonprofit organization in Southwest Virginia, and we are in opposition to HB 2212. For 26 years, local residents, all volunteers, have fought to protect our waterways and forests. Increased flooding and disturbances caused by major land developments on abandoned mine land are simultaneously happening in the Commonwealth's coalfield region. We ask that you consider seriously the implications of this bill and not move it forward out of your committee. Sharon Fisher, Clinch Coalition.
All right, thank you. Delegate O'Quinn, last word belongs to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a lot of issues that need tackling in our Commonwealth. Certainly, the ones that I enumerated before, housing being chief among them, are huge problems we're going to have to tackle. The number one impediment that I continue to hear is the cost of development caused by these particular regulations. No one, and especially me, wants to go into some regulatory scheme or lack thereof where we have virtually no oversight or regulations. I mean, that's not where anybody wants to go with this. But I think that we are getting tripped up, whether it be purposely or inadvertently, by an exceedingly stringent standard that I think that our watershed could do a little with a little less than the water that's flowing to the bay. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much, Delegate O'Quinn. All right, subcommittee members, further discussion and or a motion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Delegate Weber.
I guess there's a question in regards to the language of the bill. You had mentioned the Stormwater Act in 2014. So this bill takes everything back to 2014, but then also establishes non-point source pollution and localized flooding and stream channel erosion design criteria and measures. The DEQ is supposed to come out. Is that, as I read the bill, is that correct? I.e., DEQ is going to say, okay, here's, non-point source, here's some other criteria different than the Chesapeake. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And further question?
Delegate Weber.
Is the goal of this legislation to ensure that not only do you help protect, non-point source pollution, localized flooding, but also lessen the cost of what it costs to actually build a home for people in Southwest?
It's exactly all of those things, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right. And I guess Delegate Weber and Delegate O'Quinn, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this would just roll it back to what we had pre-2014. I don't know that DEQ would have any additional role in putting together any kind of stormwater or erosion and sediment control criteria to just basically take us back
to
pre-2014, unless I'm reading your bill wrong.
I think that's right, Mr. Chairman, but I think, and this may be a question for the department, but I think that, the department could promulgate regs at any time as it related to stormwater management and sediment control.
Okay. Did we want to ask DEQ or?
If Mike doesn't mind coming up.
So I guess, Mr. Rolban, what would the ramifications be if we rolled this back to 2014, and what would your residual regulatory authority be?
Good afternoon, Mike Rolban, Director of DEQ. First of all, before I start, the administration has no position on this bill, okay? But I can answer your technical questions. So pre-2014, there was a different quantity control requirement, okay? It was actually passed in 2010 and deferred by the General Assembly to be effective July 1st, 2014. And that was just for pre-development velocity, okay, for the 2-year storm. It was changed because of the flooding problems and the extreme erosion problems that were occurring throughout the state. And so that's when, 8 years of meetings with the DCR changed that criteria. It was delayed because of the recession and to give people time to get used to it till 2014. So we would simply go back to the pre-2014 regulation, which was based in 1992, I believe, in the Green Handbook. On the quality side, it's a little interesting because actually for most projects like this tennis court, the quality requirements that went into effect July 1st, 2024, just last year, 6 months ago, are actually less. So for example, for phosphorus is what we use for water quality. It was 2.167 pounds per acre per year on average. It's now 0.858. The reason is that was based on data from many years ago from Tom Grizzard's studies in the 70s, and the Clean Air Act has made the air cleaner, which made the rainfall cleaner, which made the dry fall cleaner, which made the runoff cleaner. So it's not cut and dry. I think we could implement this. We'd have to do new regulations. I don't think that the intent is to make it harder. So we would have to craft some regulations to meet the intent of this, which I believe is to follow the latest science from a water quality standpoint, but reduce the regulations in terms of protecting for localized stream flooding and erosion.
Okay, and I guess Director Rolband, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, that it's not just rolling it back to 2014, but I think the way you described it, it would take you back to what, 1992 standards?
Well, the quantity control was, it's minimum standard 19, published in 92. Okay. The reason it got changed was DCR actually threatened to sue Fairfax County for not enforcing that tough enough on the Lake Martin lawsuit, a 5-year experience I had. And so, you know, so it's not cut and dry, but we could work with whatever the General Assembly decides.
Very good. All right, thank you.
I would say that we have reduced costs. It's effective July 1st. We're in a 1-year transition period, so perhaps that tennis court was under the old rules, which were more onerous.
Okay. Delegate Weber.
So if this bill were to pass, you'd have to create new regs anyway, correct?
I think that'd be the only effective way, because I've published a picture of 23 inches of all the paper for all those years, 30 years of changes. So I think to make it effective and easy for everyone to implement, we would want to, I think everyone would want us to have a nice consolidated version.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Lawfer.
I have a motion when appropriate.
All right, I don't see anybody else in the queue. Delegate Lawfer.
Yes, I move that we lay gently on the table House Bill 2212.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Clerk, open the roll. Clerk, close the roll. That bill is gently laid on the table, 7-3. Thank you, Delegate O'Quinn. Okay, I believe we have Delegate Runyon, who's been very patiently waiting. And then after that, we will have Delegate Mildy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We have in front of us Water Quality Improvement Fund, Fiscal Responsibility Act, House Bill 2247. The fund is a special permanent non-reverting fund established in 1997. We've several things going back a couple of decades here. Funded by state appropriations, the Department of Environmental Quality administers a portion of the WQIF that provides grants to publicly owned treatment works for wastewater treatment upgrades. Currently, DEQ Director is required by law to enter into a WQIF grant agreements with all eligible facilities, whether or not funds are available to cover the full cost of the grant. The bill restores fiscal responsibility to WQIF by eliminating that requirement, so we won't be committing the money that we haven't appropriated. DEQ is projecting that once grant agreements are executed for the applications, it is processing WQIF obligations will exceed the current WQIF point source fund balance by about $518 million, unless the General Assembly appropriates additional funds. Unless this bill passes, there's a real risk the DEQ Director will be required by law to enter into grant agreements for which sufficient funds are not available. This bill ensures that the WQIF obligations and commitments are appropriated by the General Assembly through the full and normal budgetary process. WQIF is the state's largest and primary mechanism for funding water quality projects, and it's crucial that it be managed in a fiscally responsible and transparent manner. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Delegate Runyon. Does any member of the subcommittee have questions of the delegate?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Weber.
That was really well written there, Delegate Runyon.
Mahokey.
So just real quick, we basically said that we're putting this money towards this fund, but we don't have enough. But the director of DEQ is obligated to go into contracts. So then, if we have more contracts and we have money, we're obviously going to be in deficit, and this bill seeks to alleviate that. Correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions, comments from subcommittee members? All right. Seeing none, is there any member of the audience who wishes to speak in favor of the bill? Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Stephanie Talon, Deputy Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources. The administration does support the bill and thanks Delegate Runyon for carrying it and taking on this issue. We do think it's an important one. As you heard, Delegate Runyon did an excellent job explaining why the bill we believe is necessary, and this provision has been on the books for at least coming up on 2 decades now, and given the magnitude and complexity of WQIF, our largest water quality fund, we think it's important to have this conversation about managing this fund in a transparent and fiscally responsible manner going forward in the future. We'll hear concerns from stakeholders following here, and we completely respect and understand those concerns. Again, just wanting to make sure that given the complexity of the fund and the importance of fully funding our Chesapeake Bay efforts, we want to make sure that we have this conversation and operate this fund in a transparent manner. And we look forward to having those conversations with stakeholders under the leadership of Delegate Bulova going forward in the future outside of session, regardless of what happens with this bill. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Vassey, Virginia Manufacturers Association. We support the bill. This is critical infrastructure for the operation of all of our energy and our water-intensive plants. We depend upon our partners at the local level, and anything that would keep the WQIF fully funded and operational is essential to both of us as a public-private partnership.
Thank you. Members of the audience who wish to speak in opposition to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Chris Pomeroy. I represent the Virginia Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies and have done so since the late 1990s, which would include the entirety of the length of the Water Quality Improvement Act in Virginia. And I personally worked on the majority of the nutrient reduction projects at our major wastewater treatment facilities across the state that have been partially funded by the Commonwealth through this grant mechanism. The mechanism was put in place in the year 2005, so 20 years ago, as was mentioned, and it was done that way at the time when we made an intentional shift from occasionally doing a voluntary nutrient upgrade to adding to the state code at the time the policy that we would upgrade all of these significant facilities over time. So the policy was to upgrade all the plants, and the intent with a bill that I believe originated in the House at the time, also with a major funding package for these projects, was that the state's portion of the funding would match the state's policy, which is to upgrade all the facilities. The policy was effectively renewed in 2021 with the Enhanced Nutrient Removal Certainty Program, which is our major point source initiative to make good on the Chesapeake Bay TMDL Watershed Implementation Plan. So that's another big push of point source wastewater upgrades to come as close as a Commonwealth as we can to complying with the 2025 goal. So that was Chairman Lopez's bill in 2021, and the Municipal Wastewater Association worked on it very closely with some other stakeholders we might hear from next. And our recommendation would be to keep the grant funding policy in line with the project or the regulatory policy. It would be very late in the process to pull back on the funding piece. The effect of the bill would be to delay projects. Essentially, we would have to take 5-year projects and put them in a single file line and approve one at a time as funds are set aside. These projects often take about a 3 to 5 year process, 3-4 years of construction. So the effect of the bill would be to set aside funds that you wouldn't use for many years yet. This is work to address cash flow needs year by year for multiple projects proceeding simultaneously for 20 successful years now. For that reason, we ask that you would vote no on the bill and keep the policy as it is today intact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pomeroy.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jay Ford with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. There's not much I can add to Mr. Pomeroy's comment, so I will just say where we are in Bay restoration work is we're at a pivotal moment here in 2025. There are a lot of conversations going on in this building about best and highest use of WQIF. What we would hope is that this is one of many concepts that might be considered in a work group, hopefully, that will be forthcoming. And for that reason, we hope that you'll reject the measure before you today. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, James Hutzler, Virginia Association of Counties. It's very hard to follow Mr. Pomeroy. We oppose the bill.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Mitchell Smiley with the Virginia Municipal League, and for the reasons previously stated, we oppose this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And I guess let me just go ahead and say we've had a couple of different bills dealing with WQIF, and I think as Delegate Runyon knows, and a couple other people spoke to it, the WQIF needs some love just all around. If you take a look through it, it's been kind of piecemealed together over the years, and also been overridden in a number of places by the budget. And so we have put in a budget amendment to put together a pretty comprehensive work group just to look at all the different sectors and make sure that we're doing right, with respect to our water quality improvement projects across the board. But Delegate Runyon, last word is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do appreciate your all's consideration. I was pleased to be able to work with some of those groups and have these conversations. And I think that's probably the most important thing that can come out of this is we're going to move forward and address those multi-year issues that we've got built into the WQIF. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
All right, thank you, Delegate Runyon. Delegate Lawfer.
I have a motion when appropriate.
All right, Delegate Lawfer.
I move that we lay House Bill 2247 gently on the table.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Clerk, open the roll. All right. Clerk, close the roll. That bill is very gently laid on the table, 8-2. Thank you, Delegate Runyon. Delegate Mildy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
House Bill 2132.
Yes, House Bill 2132 is about sediment basins and stormwater management ponds. Quickly, I'll just, because it takes a minute to understand what I'm talking about here. When you build a commercial development or a large residential development, you have to do a stormwater management pond. If you want to go in early and clear that lot, you'll get an early grading plan approved by the county or the city. And that early grading plan still must have a sediment basin that collects the runoff and protects the environment outside of the site. That is a full-blown sediment basin. It's like a stormwater management pond. It has the riser, the tube in the middle. It has the structure, the dam. It has the tubes running through that. It has everything. It has to be seeded and grass has to be grown on it before they'll release the securities. When you go to get a site plan, you almost always build that structure exactly in the same place. It is the same structure. And occasionally you might do more to it on the site plan, but they are essentially the same structure. And you have to get bonded each time right now. There are two parts of this bill. This is the part that I'm most interested in. It's not, you should be given a credit for the work that's in place or that's already secured by a bond or a letter of credit or cash to make sure you can finish that sediment basin. If you've already secured that structure, you shouldn't be required to secure the new structure that is exactly the same or almost the same as the first structure. And so this just asks that it directs the counties to give a credit. The engineers would calculate a credit for the work that's already bonded or for the sediment basin. The other part of this bill, proposed bill, is when you talk about a sediment basin, and not the stormwater management pond for the site plan, but for the early grading plan, when you do a sediment basin, right now state code allows the counties to ask for at least half of those securities to be in the form of cash or a letter of credit, which is the same thing as cash. They're more expensive for a developer to get they have to get them from a bank, and the other half can be a bonded or basically an insurance policy. I am asking that we reduce that to 25% instead of the 50% requirement, that only 25% must be in the form of a letter of credit or cash. The reason I was on the board for 12 years in Stafford, the reason the county wants to have that letter of credit or cash is they can really very quickly cash that in and start doing work if there is a problem, some kind of an emergency on the site and the developer is nowhere to be found, which has happened, especially in 07, 08, 09. But I will tell you, I think 25% is more than enough. and because you can still get the money from the bonding agency for the rest, it just takes a little bit longer. And really, they use it as it's the threat alone is what you see most often. The counties will threaten the developer, if you don't hurry up and fix this problem, we will pull your letter of credit. All right, hopefully I got that out in an understandable way.
All right, thank you, Delegate. Does any member have a question for the delegate? Delegate Weber.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So basically, from your description, and correct me if I'm wrong, at least I'm trying to wrap my head around the bond issue. So I'm going to clear, I'm going to do the sediment pond. I need a bond to be able to do that, correct?
Although you need, actually, half of it has to be in the form of cash or a letter of credit. The other half can be in a bond.
So half a bond, and then I give the county half of what it would cost to do it, or half of
You just have to secure it. They want to make sure.
Delegate Mildy.
Mr. Chair, I'm so sorry.
I
Yes,
apologize, I should have asked.
Mr. Chair, the county is, they want you to, it's an insurance policy that the county makes you get, basically, half of which has to be in cash or a letter of credit, essentially the same thing as cash, and the other half can be in a bond, which is really just an insurance company creates the bond. Does that answer your question?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Weber.
How much does each locality determine what that amount is?
It's so when you apply for a early grading permit or a site plan, you hire engineers, Mr. Chair, and the engineers make the calculations, and the county or the city will review those and approve them. But it's always on the applicant to provide the professional first shot at it. The counties very often will tell you that they want adjustments here and there. And for instance, on a 8-acre parcel with a 47,000 square foot building, you might see a $300,000 or $400,000 bond necessary for a sediment basin.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Weber.
I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to wrap my head around how the whole money flows. Okay, so I put in a bond, or I put in the bond in the cash, and I develop my sediment pond. And then it's time for the big stormwater pond. Do I not, and you said that your bill is basically a credit, would it be rolling the old bond into the new one?
So, Mr. Chair, the engineer, as you're probably maybe working on that, moving the earth around and working on the plan, that's the plans for the early grading plan and the sediment basin, you are developing your site plan, and the engineer is now doing the same thing over again. The exercise is the same. So the engineer will once again develop the cost estimate to complete the stormwater management pond, which is again a big hole in the ground, a riser coming out of the center of it, a dam, and some tubes going through that dam. And it's done separately, even though the structure is already bonded. The same structure actually already exists in some cases. It may have already been built by the time you're getting your site plan approved. So what this asks is that a credit is, if you've already given an insurance policy or a letter or a combination insurance policy, letters of credit on a sediment basin that's the same structure or has some of the components of the structure needed for the final plan, you should be given credit. So if it was $300,000 for the sediment basin and $300,000 for the stormwater management pond, you wouldn't have any more securities due. If it was $400,000 for the stormwater management pond, which is very possible, it'd be a little bit heftier, some things might have changed, then you should only have to come up with that delta of $100,000. People are being bonded twice. They're being required to bond and put forth letters of credit on the same thing 2 times, which can add up. Can be very costly.
So I guess Delegate Mildy, maybe I can kind of follow up on what Delegate Weber was asking. So if you have a sediment basin and you've moved from the portion of your project that requires a sediment basin to where you're doing a permanent stormwater management facility, is the bond released on the original sediment basin, or is that held on to so that you have 2 of them at the same time?
Right. Mr. Chair. Yeah.
Yes, Delegate Mildy.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to cut you. Yeah, that's the problem. Is you have 2 at the same time. It's the same structure. It's literally the same structure bonded twice. Because it's not normal. They won't. I've never seen them or heard of them releasing the bond. And if they did, on the sediment basin and giving back the letters of credit. If they did, then I wouldn't be asking for this. This is in the cases where you have already posted securities in one form or the other for the sediment basin, and now you're being asked to post securities again for the same structure.
Okay, and I guess my second question, so I agree that oftentimes these are on the same footprint. Sediment basin is probably going to be very different than a constructed wet pond or bioretention facility. But anyways, your idea is to be able to take that, what the bond would be for the final facility and have that be credited. So what would the mechanism be, right? Because you're bonding for a sediment basin, not for a stormwater management facility that might cost additional money. So what would the mechanics of that be?
Mr. Chair, to your first point, yeah, if they were not on the same footprint, then that wouldn't apply. They almost always are on the same footprint because of the contours of the land when you're designing, when you're developing a piece of property to the low point, right? The mechanism would be that the engineer who's applying, that you're using to apply to the county for the final site plan would, in addition to the calculations of what it would cost to finish this entire stormwater management pond in case the developer wouldn't, then he would come up with a calculation of what it costs to do that. So again, the example being a $400,000 stormwater management pond, and you would be required to post securities for that. But if you already have $300,000 in securities posted for the sediment basin, you would just simply be able to only have to post the $100,000 delta because you already have securities in place for that same structure of up to $300,000. Am I making sense a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. Other members, Delegate Krizik, and then we'll go to see what the audience.
At the risk of muddying the waters here. So give us some examples of a project that's going through, let's say you get this and it's passed and it's now the law, and the bond has to be called, if you will, for some unforeseen situation. Mm-hmm. And how has this changed that?
I don't believe that it would. The second part that reduces how much has to be in a letter of credit or cash, essentially the same thing for the sediment basin, from 50 to 25%, that would be the only one that you may hear an argument from VML that they want to have more cash readily available almost instantaneously. A couple of days they can grab that money to fix a storm problem. The other part we've spent most of the time talking about has actually no impact whatsoever. You're literally they already have the securities in place either way. The county, when I say they're getting double securities on the same structure, there's no other, probably no other better way to say it.
Okay. Let's go ahead and hear from the audience. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak in favor of the bill? Mr. Clark.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not Pat Calvert from the VCN, but Andrew Clark with the Home Builders Association. We thank the delegate for bringing the bill. I think this is it is not a common practice throughout every jurisdiction, but in a large number of localities, developers find themselves double bonding. And so, especially on the residential development side, where cash flow and predictability is pretty critical, having this relief, I think, just allows kind of the developer to focus on other aspects of the project. But the delegate explained it perfectly well. It does not affect the ability or limit the ability for the locality to hold on to that bond to make sure they have that protection. But in a lot of instances, those bonds aren't being released. And so it's essentially kind of layering one bond for that kind of initial facility after getting an E&S plan approved and then having to bond it again. So this is really just a cash flow and a predictability thing for our industry.
Delegate Weber, did you have a question? I guess, Andrew, if I could, I think you said something that localities can do it the way that Delegate Mildy is proposing, but some choose not to, and this would require them to do it this way?
Mr. Chairman, I would say it's really unclear, actually, quite frankly. I mean, we've talked to engineers and some of the localities. I think it's a matter of interpretation and practice, and so I couldn't give you an answer of whether it's, I think it's just one of those things. And many of the sections, this code section and land use section, were just different localities have different approaches to it. Localities that were really impacted by 2008 have pretty aggressive bond policies. Others that weren't have kind of loosened up those policies a little bit, and so it's just one of those instances.
All right, thank you. Director Rolband.
Good afternoon again. Would like to tell you that the administration strongly supports this proposal. The reason is that it will reduce the cost of development and the cost of housing. It's been discussed about how you can double bond these facilities, and that's the bottom line issue. So typically, to answer Delegate Weber's question, typically the way this is done is a unit price schedule that each locality adopts. And the unit prices include things like the cost of excavation per cubic yard. So what happens is you've excavated a hole to make a sediment pond. You'll now put a stormwater basin in the same location. Oftentimes it could be slightly bigger, it could be slightly smaller, but right now you're counting those same, assuming there was nothing there, the original development. So that's where the double bonding in particular comes into play. So I think this will reduce costs, not a lot, but a little bit, but every little bit helps when you're buying a house. Thank you.
Okay. Members of the audience who wish to speak in opposition to the bill. All right, good afternoon, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Mitchell Smiley with the Virginia Municipal League. And as the Delegate Milday did indicate, we do have concerns that with the bond that is secured, that there is a sufficient amount of capital to complete the project. And I think that as Andrew mentioned earlier, there were localities that post-2008 this was a particular problem in. And so my understanding is much of this code section has been changed in the wake of 2008 and making sure that those bonds that are required by localities are sufficient to complete not only the sediment basin, but also the stormwater facility itself. And so we do have concerns with changing some of these bonding levels. I think I'm not a technical expert on this exact element, so I can answer the questions if you all have any, but we do have concerns that this would potentially inhibit the locality's ability to complete that project and complete that stormwater facility. Thank you.
Delegate Wilt, do you have a question? Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, it sounds like, or I would think that you talk about the funding formula, having all that put in place. I would have thought that would have taken place at the very beginning of the project. What we're talking about here, Mr. Chairman, I think feels like this is a small portion of the larger project, and it just seemed logical to me that question would have been answered right up front. I don't know if that's a question.
I think it was a question, but feel free to answer it if you have an answer to it.
I mean, I think it certainly is a long process, and I think that the intention is that this is addressed at the beginning of the project. I think that as the project changes and as the stormwater facility is determined, I think in some cases can change throughout that process. But I would defer to other folks who are better versed.
Delegate Weber.
So the first part of the bill, as I understand it, I'm going to use $400,000 is what it costs to build my sediment pond, and I have to bond that 25 or 50 or up to 50% in cash, and then the rest is in bond, and that goes to the locality. The first part of this bill says I built that, and then it's time for the stormwater management pond, right? And as I understand the delegate, as that's getting developed, the engineer and all those plans are then submitted to the county, and the county says, okay, it's going to cost X to build, so you have to bond X. So you have to bond $500,000. And what the delegate is saying, well, if it's in the same spot as the sediment pond, then that $400,000 will roll in, rather than the locality holding on to that $400,000 and then having the builder add another $500 on top. And what he said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that what the bill says is that $400,000 will then roll into the stormwater, so the locality is still holding that $400,000, and the builder just tacks on another $100,000. How is that? My question is, how is that going to hamper the locality's ability to clean up if something goes wrong when you're still holding $400,000 to $500,000?
So I don't have an answer for that. When it comes to counties, I don't have an answer for exactly how every county is going to do that. I think that the delegate does raise a concern that there is, in some cases in his experience, that there is double billing, double bonding that is occurring, and I think that that's not something that I can really speak to how that works in every single county. For the Virginia Municipal League, we represent cities and towns, so by and large, I'm not able to speak on behalf of counties, and I can defer to the Association of Counties on that topic. But what I can say is that in talking to our members on this bill in particular, the concern was expressed to us, to express to you all, that there is a requirement or a need on the local level to have sufficient bonding for the completion of the project. And so I think whether this gets there or not, I think is something I can't actually answer at the moment. But I think that what I can say on this element is, when it comes to the securities that are available, we've had concerns from localities with experiences where there was not a line of credit that actually be pulled on in the wake of 2007. And I think, as the home builder said earlier, we do have that concern. But I can't speak to exactly how that double bonding is or is not occurring in every locality.
All right, one final question for Delegate Weber.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So your biggest concern is the 25%?
That's the concern that I've received from our members.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
All right. Mr. Pomeroy.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Chris Pomeroy representing the Virginia Municipal Stormwater Association, so local government interests again, which admittedly do overlap a fair amount with the Municipal League and the Association of Counties. On a situation of what I'll describe as pure double bonding, in other words, bonding for a singular activity twice, for example, excavating the same cubic yard of fill, I think we would agree that's something that should not be double bonded per se. Our opposition to the bill comes more from some either the nuances in the language and also the adequacy of existing language that addresses the requirements for bonding in this situation. The bill does introduce a concept that we don't find in DEQ's regulatory program of an early grading plan. That'd be the first time I believe that appears in state code. So our members raised questions with us about the implications of that. I understand that there's a practice to that effect in some communities, but in any event, it raised a question about how this interacts with DEQ's complex stormwater regs. But to the specific question about the double bonding issue, there are some aspects of the language, if you look closely, it refers to various types of sediment features, not all of which might be a sediment basin, a hole in the ground that would be found to be the same hole in the ground that's later used for the stormwater program. The bill refers to other measures intended to trap sediment. So there's a detail there. Third, existing law, it already requires that the performance bonds, number one, be reasonable. That appears on line 19 of the bill. So if the concern is that some county is taking an approach where they're double bonding for the same thing, there's definitely a reasonable question there. And the bill is also, the existing statute already caps the amount at the cost necessary to initiate and maintain the appropriate conservation action. The way this has been explained to me by our members is that in making the application for the permit, the local land disturbance permit, usually it's incumbent upon the developer to propose a schedule of values for the various phases of the project. And if that schedule of values is presented that accounts for the excavation once and not a second time, that should go, I'm told that those are typically accepted and compared against schedules of values in the communities, that they wouldn't be looking at that twice. If they are, there's probably existing language in the statute that could be used to deal with that. On the latter provision in the bill about the 25% cap, that uniformly came up as a concern among the local government members in our group. So again, there's not a big quarrel about double counting per se, but the language in the statute we find adequate for addressing that now. We have some concern about the additional language appearing that's new or perhaps inviting different interpretations in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pomeroy.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, James Hutzler, Virginia Association of Counties, we oppose the bill.
All right, Delegate Mildy, you get the last word.
Well, may I, and I don't, tell me when I'm stepping out of bounds, Mr. Chair, but may I move an amendment to strike lines, the italicized language on 30, 31, and 32?
All right, you can't. Somebody on this subcommittee can.
I meant it. Excuse me. May I offer that?
All right, we have an amendment before us. Delegate Lawfer.
I actually had a motion when appropriate, although I appreciate, this discussion. I don't think we've had enough compelling argument about how many, places this could affect, et cetera. So I would like to move a motion, if that's...
Right, so that would be a substitute motion.
Okay, well, I don't want to move the substitute, I'm
No.
sorry.
You would substitute a motion to...
A substitute motion to lay gently on the table House Bill 2132.
All right, it's properly moved and seconded. All right, clerk, open the roll. Clerk, close the roll. That bill is tabled 6-4. But Delegate Mildy, thank you very much for being here. And I think we all have learned a little bit today about bonding and sediment bonds. Yes. All right. Okay, our last bills are members of this subcommittee. So if we're here for a couple hours, that's totally on us. So what I'm going to do... I'm going to go ahead and have Delegate Bloxham first with House Bill 1810.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I present from here?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. House Bill 1810 simply increases the price on permits at VMRC. And the way the permit process works at VMRC, once you put the permit in, the staff will either suggest that the commission approve, and then you send it to VIMS. They look at it to see if they have any say in it. And at VMRC, if one complaint or one objection comes, then it has to be heard. No matter the price, it has to go in front of the commission at their monthly meeting. All this does, and I'm not even sure where the dollar amount came from, because I would prefer not to even have a dollar amount in it, but it raises the dollar amount from $500,000 to $1 million of the ones that could, if it is not objected to, and if staff has suggested approval, and if VIMS has suggested approval, then it goes into the block at their monthly meeting, and the commission would go ahead and vote it through as a block. So it would keep the meetings moving a little faster. And that's the gist of the bill, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you much, Delegate Bloxham. And so per our previous discussions, I think I've been convinced that the $1 million is reasonable. It's a nice round number. I think it's also fair per the bill that we allow for an adjustment through regulatory process every 5 years based on the consumer price index. The part that I can't explain, and I haven't been able to find anybody who can really adequately explain, is that second part about 3 years after 2028 using a whole different kind of consumer price index. And so if you would consider it a friendly amendment, Delegate Bloxham, I would ask that we have an amendment that would strike after website on line 18 through the end of line 23. And that would just make it very clean that once every 5 years, they can update that amount by the Consumer Price Index.
I will accept the friendly amendment.
Okay, does everybody understand what we're doing? Okay, we're making it a simple bill. Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded to approve the amendment. Anissa, you got that? Okay. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, so the bill as amended is before us. Does any member of the committee have any questions or comments? Hearing none, do we have any members of the audience who wish to speak in favor of the bill? Do we have any members of the audience who wish to speak in opposition to the bill? All right, we come back to the committee. We operate by motion.
Move to report as amended.
No, you're on top of it.
Properly,
You got it.
it's
Second,
properly
I
moved
second,
and
I second
seconded.
Delegate Herring.
Hearing no further discussion, clerk, open the roll. All right, clerk, close the roll. That bill reports with amendment 10-0. Delegate Bloxham, you got another one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill HB 1834. So about 4 years ago, we created a maintenance waterway fund to dredge local rivers and creeks, and we gave the Port Authority the program. The port does a really good job at funding docks and harbors and that. They have not been able to get this money out the door. The Middle Peninsula is probably ahead of the rest of the Commonwealth in that they've got a regional dredge permit, maintenance permit ready to go. They have projects that are ready. They've got spoil sites ready, but they cannot get the money flow out. These projects would simply go to the VMRC. VMRC has to approve the project anyway. So this would be more like a DEQ funding where the funding would go to the agency that's actually given the permit. So it kind of simplifies it. The port, I think, is fine with washing their hands of it because they couldn't see how to work it. VMRC does most of it anyway. So that's what the bill does, just takes that fund and moves it over to the VMRC.
All right, thank you very much, Delegate Bloxham. Any members of the committee have comments or questions of the delegate? Seeing none, Delegate Krizik.
Mr. Chairman, there's another bill, is it yours as well, that talks about this dredging around the spaceport? And that one would be using that one would use the Port of Virginia, and I thought that was the kind of what we want to do, and now we're talking about not doing it that way here.
Delegate Bloxham.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'll answer. The dredging around Wallops Island is actually a port. What they need is a dock and a landing to bring the rocket off. This would not be in the maintenance part of that. What Rocket Lab is asking of us, well, I'll say Virginia Space is asking us to have a real port and a dock behind it. So it's a separate issue that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I realize.
Delegate Krizik.
Yeah, I realize it's a separate issue. I was just wondering, it seemed like that was always the port was the expert on dredging, but you're saying that in this case, because it's not a port, that it doesn't matter? I mean, who's doing the dredging? They would be contracting it out, Mr. Chairman, is that?
Delegate Bloxham.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'd answer the delegate that the dredging is always going to be contracted out anyway. The port is extremely good at figuring out how money goes to docks and ports by volume. They usually do measure everything by the commercial products that go across it, and they fund that portion of it. They couldn't really figure out any way to get the dredging for these. What we're talking about dredging are the smaller creeks and the waterways. Right now, Middle Peninsula is far ahead of this, and they've got areas that could use some maintenance, and it's called maintenance dredging is what it would be.
Okay. All right, members of the audience who wish to speak in favor of the measure.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kyle Shreve on behalf of the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission. As Delegate Bloxham said, Mr. Chairman, we do quite a bit of these projects, and it really has to do with depth. It's shallow versus large at the port. This would just help us streamline the process through the fund. We've included in the bill down below, as you will see, to help us iron out any problems with the handoff that VMRC would be able to recognize what has been done already at the port, try to make a smooth transition. But again, we feel that the experts at VMRC are the ones to handle the impact of small waterway dredging.
All right.
Happy to answer any questions.
A question for Kyle. Who oversees dredging now? Is it VMRC when it comes to like permitting and allowing all that stuff? And that's the reason we're moving the money over to them?
So, Mr. Chairman, I would answer Delegate Weber that yes, you have to go to VMRC to get your permit for the project itself and then go back to the port for the money. We've also made some modifications in the past couple of years with Delegate Bloxham to make sure that we can end through the budget that we've done to help ease the process, both with how the leasing is done as well as what to do with the spoils, because that is we want to make sure the spoils are dispensed with in a proper fashion.
All right. Delegate Weber, you good? Okay. Thank you, sir. Any additional members wish to speak in favor of the bill? Anybody in the audience who wishes to speak in opposition to the bill? Seeing none, we bring it back to the subcommittee. Further comments or motions?
I have a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Wilt.
Move to report.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded. Seeing no additional discussion, clerk open the roll. Clerk close the roll. That bill reports 10-0. Delegate Clark, House Bill 2178. Take us home.
I will try my best to be brief. Today I have HB 2178, the Plastic Pellet Free Water Act. I asked that the committee move, I believe there's an amendment for this. Yes.
Amendment or a substitute?
Substitute.
Okay. Do we have a motion on the substitute? Move the substitute. All right, it's been seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. All right, the substitute's properly before us. Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 2178 would direct the Department of Environmental Quality to establish a program to ensure zero discharge of pre-production plastics, such as plastic pellets, flakes, fibers, powders, and powdered coloring for plastics onto land and waterways, water from facilities that manufacturers handle or transport them. Pre-production plastics are a major source of microplastic pollution. Microplastics are increasingly being studied for their links to adverse health effects in humans, including DNA damage, organ dysfunction, metabolic disorders, and cardiovascular diseases such as stroke and heart attack. According to the analysis of 2016 data, it was estimated that 10 trillion plastic pellets littered our oceans in just 1 year. With plastic productions expected to triple by 2060, microplastic pollutions can be expected to increase unless new measures are put into place, such as HB 2178. The Zero Discharge Program would require new and existing facilities to apply for individual stormwater permits, prohibit spilling pre-production plastics, require any spills to be promptly cleaned up without causing harm to the environment, and take steps to prevent future discharge of pre-production plastics. There are at least 7 facilities in Virginia that produces such plastics. This bill would apply to all such facilities. The Clean Water Act and Resource Conservation and Recovery Act have been used in litigation against facilities for pre-production plastic pollutions. However, these acts are not preventative measures. We need a solution that will prevent the problem from happening. So I do urge the members to support this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delegate Clark. Do members of the committee have questions for Delegate Clark? Okay, seeing none. Delegate Weber, and then Delegate Bloxham.
Do you want to go first?
Mr. Chairman, I guess my question is when we're talking about zero discharge, and is there a level established by EPA or someone that actually allows any, or is there a number that is allowed, or is zero? I'm just looking at your substitute.
All right, Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the delegate, when I say zero discharge or release, it just means zero pre-production plastics discharge or release to a body of water or land outside of the property lines. Often stormwater permits say scant discharge are allowed, but I don't know that the Virginia law says that says that in stormwater discharge permits.
Okay. Delegate Weber.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the gentleman mentioned that another section of code had been used in litigation. What was the outcome of that litigation?
Delegate Clark.
I may need to phone a friend for that one.
Okay. Do we have anybody? Could you repeat the question and see if we have anybody in the audience who can provide a technical response?
Yeah, the gentleman had mentioned that there was litigation in regards to some folks in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that another portion of code had been used. What was the outcome of that litigation, and how is this legislation needed because of that litigation?
Hi, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Ellie Wilson with Environment Virginia. To answer the question, there has not been a lawsuit in Virginia regarding this, but recently there was one in Pennsylvania. They were found guilty, and so the point of this is to prevent this from happening in the first place. And a result of the litigation was to implement a lot of the measures that this bill would require, so that it's a preventative measure.
Okay. Delegate Bloxham.
Follow-up question on the litigation.
Delegate Bloxham.
So in Pennsylvania, do they have is it a zero or tolerance, or is there a actual number that you look for in this?
Mr. Chair, there's currently no federal limits for this. So in terms of the litigation that was put forth in Pennsylvania, they found to be regularly discharging these into the environment, and it was going over what their permits allowed.
Follow-up question.
Delegate Bloxham.
Just so everybody understands what a microplastic is, I mean, I know it's nasty. It gets in the fish, fish, everything. But toothpaste, I mean, what are we talking about here? What plant was distributing this product? I mean, I think it's in makeup. There's some other things also. I mean, can you explain?
Mr. Chair, overall, I brought a sample, so I'm happy to pass these around if that would be helpful. Some show and tell. And so those were found along the James River in probably about as much space as this podium here, just on the ground, from pollution from plastic production facilities in Virginia. So these pre-production plastics are the building blocks of everything that you see that is plastic. So they are used to build all of the plastic that we have, and they are shipped to then be melted down and be used in making plastic products. So they are quite common. They are the first part of the whole process of producing plastics.
All right, let's go to Delegate Krizik.
I'm just curious, since you have a show and tell, where did you find the pellets and how easy is it to find them?
Mr. Chair, to answer the question, it is quite easy to find them. I found them along the James River, about 20 miles from here. And once you start looking for them, you can't stop finding them, it feels like. There are some maps that show indications of where all the plastic pellets are found across the whole country. There's a couple locations here in Virginia where they have been found.
Delegate Weber.
Sorry, I have a question for somebody. So in regards to, like Pennsylvania, they exceeded their permit. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, if an entity or manufacturer is going to discharge anything, I would think in the Commonwealth into our waters, they would have a permit. So I guess my question might be to DEQ, how many people have permits and what is the allotment currently?
All right, Director Rolband.
Good afternoon, and great question. Chairman, a couple things. First of all, our position is to oppose this, okay, from the administration. And the reason, number one, is that to the extent that this bill is going to regulate these discharges of pre-production plastics, not microplastics, it's pre-production plastics, we already regulate it. Now, if someone found some, like we just did on the James River, hopefully they'll file a complaint with our PREP program, and we'll have a pollution response out there, a team out there to go look at it and find out where it came from. Because if it came from a plant in Virginia, they're violating the current permit requirements. So I don't think we need a new permit requirement when we already have it. It sounds like there's a problem that we need to investigate if we were identified where this came from, and we'll find it. The second is part of this bill regulates these plastics from non-point sources, but they're trying to use it with a permit that's for point sources. It's a different program. So I think we'd have to also fix the language. But the bottom line is we already have a requirement that you're not allowed to discharge these. So in all, multiple provisions in our code, but for example, good housekeeping in our stormwater controls is that facilities that handle pre-production plastic or plastic waste shall implement BMPs to eliminate stormwater discharges of plastics. That's from our stormwater side. And then, of course, on the VIPTES production side, they're not allowed to discharge any. So the big thing here is that we don't believe there's a new requirement that exists. If anything, it sounds like if there is a problem and there's been particles found, we need to know where they are, and we'll investigate it.
Further questions?
Yeah, let me ask a real quick question, and then I'll get to you, Delegate Weber. So I guess Director Rolband, if my understanding is correct, is that these kind of facilities are VIPTES general permittees, right?
Some might be individual permits. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I checked last night. Yeah. So it's a general permit. If there is a problem, and it sounds like there might be, what is the process for designating these for individual permits that can actually be tailored to address particular problems?
Well, first step, we might not go to the IP process. We first would go to an enforcement action. So the PREP team would first investigate the pollution that occurred, determine the extent of it. Our enforcement, our compliance team would then obviously give them a notice of violation, and ideally it would be fixed immediately. If it's not, we have a very a regulatory process to go through an enforcement process. And if they don't respond to the notice of violation, then we'll give a notice of a consent order. If they don't respond to the consent order, we turn to the AG and we do a consent decree.
Okay. And then I guess one more question. I'll turn it over to Delegate Weber. So I would assume, though, that there is a higher level of scrutiny by DEQ in terms of enforcing an individual permittee than would a general permittee, which there's hundreds, if not thousands of those.
Right, we would go to an IP. But right now we only know of, I believe, 7 facilities. One reports at 6, one at 7. There's a handful of facilities that make these in Virginia.
Okay. Delegate Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So did I understand you correctly that under current regulations, they're not supposed to let anything out?
Correct.
And then with our current stormwater regs as well, they're to design a stormwater facility as to not let anything out, correct?
Right. They shouldn't be. The only time they'll be in stormwater is if they've gotten loose out on the ground and washed into the rain. But hopefully they'll never leave the production facility.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Okay. Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to address a couple things that was said. The changes that was made in the amendments made sure that we limited the bill to permitting sites only. And then also in the research, nearly every one of those 7 facilities are already violating these permits. But however, if a citizen does find out that they're violating, they have to go through great lengths to address these concerns. And then current companies can pollute with impunity since there's no monitoring system as well. So there's no new monitoring mechanism that's put in place at the end of the drains to monitor the plastic pellets.
Okay. And I guess to that point, I guess Delegate, or I'm sorry, Director Rolband, in terms of the continuous monitoring technology, can you tell us how that would work, both with respect to industrial and stormwater discharges?
Well, I would have to look into the continuous monitoring requirement or suggestion of how that would handle. But, you know, the big thing is, number one, you know, in terms of being difficult to find these enforcement actions, it's all online. I did that about a year ago. So every enforcement action's online. And we've taken the time it takes to do an enforcement action from 670 days to lately it's running around 155. So we're actively enforcing our rules, and that, which I think is a good thing for the environment. So what we need to do is, number one, find out where these problems are and take the existing rules that we already have and make sure that people are following them. And if they're not, we'll go through the enforcement process.
Okay, thank you. Sure. All right, any other? All right, actually, I don't even know that we began really with our audience folks. So anybody who would like to speak in favor of the bill, here is your chance. And then if you plan to speak in opposition of the bill, if you can come down and make sure that you're relatively close to the podium, but welcome.
Once again, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Ellie Wilson with Environment Virginia. We're in support of this bill. One thing that I do just want to drive home is that this bill has a big focus on monitoring. That is the whole reason that we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know if it's happening all over. And this bill would require the monitoring. That is a rather newer technology, and it's something that we desperately need in order to minimize these impacts. It's happening throughout the Commonwealth. As you saw with those little pieces of plastic, it's easily confused as food for wildlife. That ends up in our water and in our food chain in our own bodies. So I encourage you to support the bill to reduce this type of plastic pollution in our environment.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Blair St. Ledger Olson with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. Quick thank you to Pat Calvert for pretending to be me on every other bill this committee. Sorry for being so late. We do thank the patron for bringing this bill forward to advance this dialogue. It is an important issue for clean waterways. And with that, we support the bill. Thank you much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jay Ford with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We'd also like to thank the delegate for bringing this and for bringing the issue of plastics and microplastics to the General Assembly's attention many times at this point. We're really grateful. We have a disconnect between the permit and the reality, and what he has included in his bill that really picks up where the stormwater regs and the permit is on monitoring, is on a specific cleanup plan, is on increased transparency. And this happens a lot of times in water world. Everyone says, we got a permit for that. And yet we go out and we take water quality samples and we figure out, well, it's still getting out here. So there is a disconnect between the two. We think the delegates' legislation brings some much needed transparency and additional follow-up to this process. I would say for the Bay, right now, when we look at microplastics, it is an alarming potential toxic sector. We are over 90% of what goes into the Bay never comes out. So we are going one direction, and it is the absolute wrong direction when it comes to plastics content in the Bay, and the body of science is building up on those potential harms that microplastics represent. So anything we can do to sort of bridge that disconnect between, yes, there is a permit, yes, there's a stormwater procedure in place, and also they're still making their way into the waterways, we welcome and we hope you'll support. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, Pat Calvert, just Virginia Conservation Network at this point. I think we're eating a credit card a week. So I think we're going to have to deal with this. And we think that this bill is a common sense way to deal with it. So we support the bill and hope that you will vote for it.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Steve Carter Lovejoy with the Virginia Sierra Club. We also support this bill.
All right. All right, those who are in opposition to the measure.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Massey, Virginia Manufacturers Association. Although you've heard there are 7 pellet facilities, the way this bill is written, this would apply to hundreds of facilities. This isn't a single producer of these pellets. If you look at specifically the definition on line 15, facility means a facility where pre-production plastic is manufactured, handled, or transported. Then the definition of plastic is not just the resin, and that's the 7 facilities you were discussing earlier. It goes on to include flakes, fibers, powders, and powdered coloring. So that's every recycling center in the Commonwealth. It's every company that uses a resin to make everything from power equipment to automobiles. Every one of them would come under this new regulation. And as the director had explained, every one of these facilities is either under a general permit or another permit. But let me point out, this bill goes way further than state regulation. If you go down to starting on line 35, it proscribes that every one of these facilities has to have a stormwater permit. That is a massive investment. If you're making a housing for a chainsaw, why do you need a stormwater permit if it's inside? Question mark. This bill is also written where it would require pre-production containment systems. It would also require sealed containers, which is not always possible, vacuum systems, and source control. We get these resin, by the way, by tanker, by train, and they're transferred usually by vacuum. So the question is, if the railroad is on our property and there's a spill, who's responsible? Is it the railroad or is it us? It's on our land, it's not our vehicle. This bill also finally says it mixes apples and kumquats. It says point source and non-point source. We're not non-point source. We're all regulated. So I don't know how you actually implement this. We don't disagree with the point. This stuff does not need to be in the environment, and it shouldn't. But at the end of the day, this bill is not how you get there. Enforcement action is, because what I have not heard in any of these discussions is if there is an enforcement action against any of the 7 or any of the 100, and there isn't. But if there is, they should actually be susceptible to the existing law. And it won't happen again, I promise, after one action. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Shreve.
Mr. Chairman, Kyle Shreve, on behalf of the Virginia Forestry Association, we share the same concerns as Mr. Vassy and oppose the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Brad Copenhaver, on behalf of the Virginia Agribusiness Council, share the same concerns. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to bring it back to the subcommittee. I guess let me just make a couple of comments.
There's somebody online, too.
Oh, there is somebody online, I'm sorry. So this would be Mr. Huntington. Mr. Huntington, thank you for joining us virtually. Sorry, I almost forgot you.
No problem, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. I'm the Marine Debris Strategy Director for Clean Virginia Waterways, and we support this legislation. There's been a lot of talk of 7 facilities in Virginia. This year there will be 8. There is a $34 million facility that is coming online on the Stanton River this year. And Delegate Clark mentioned the size of the Virginia port in relation to plastics. With the new facility being built in Virginia, the amount of plastic produced and exported from Virginia is going to increase. And this has the potential to increase the amount of plastic entering Virginia's waters. So as a result of all that, it's important to have the necessary protections in place, because we know microplastics are in our water. We know plastic pellets are in our waterways. Ellie brought them in, and shared some with you all this afternoon. It's important to recognize that prevention reduces the financial cost associated with environmental costs and with the financial costs. Plastic pellets spill, whether they're in the production facility or they're carried on trains. We saw that on the Anacostia River this year. Also important to mention that the Clean Water Act explicitly allows states to establish water quality standards that are more stringent than federal requirements. The EPA has recently acknowledged that there is a loophole in the Clean Water Act for plastic pellet production. And this legislation would put Virginia on the leading edge in the nation to combat a really serious problem. So I hope it's the will of the committee that this bill moves forward. And thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Huntington. All right. Before I get to Delegate Wilt, I just wanted to kind of make a couple of really quick points. Number one, I want to thank everybody for the robust conversation. Number two, I think we want to acknowledge that this is a huge issue in terms of plastic in our water. I guess the third one is that I think we got an enforcement problem is part of this. And then fourth, I think there might be some tools that we might be able to beef up that we already have. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the Virginia Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits, you've got general permits, which are just kind of, here's the general good practices you're going to put in place. And then you also have individual permits that address particular facilities, the challenges with those facilities. And I think even more importantly is oftentimes they will have very specific monitoring requirements attached to them. Anyways, I think there's some good stuff here. I would like to be able to give us some more time to figure out a bill that might have less of an impact on a lot of other different sectors. And so if the subcommittee would be so inclined, I would entertain a motion to pass by. But before we do that, Delegate Wilt.
Mr. Chair, I was curious, maybe the lady that presented our sample, what was that microplastics?
Mr. Chair, it would be considered microplastics. Some would, it would be considered a microplastic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Bloxham. Delegate Herring.
Mr. Chair, I move that this bill go by for the day so we can work on it.
Do I got a second on that?
Second.
All right. I think that's a voice vote, correct? Yes. All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. All right. That bill passes by for the day. Does anybody have any other business for the good of the order? I just want to say thank you so much. Lots of really good conversation. Appreciate the dialogue. That was 2 hours, guys. So we'll try to go ahead and keep moving fast. I know we got a couple more bills that'll come through. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. We are adjourned. Thank you.